Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Patricia Kong, and I am happy to be with two special Nexus people, Scott Crane and Laura Hansen, who have been working with several companies. Specifically, this one is really interesting about how they chose Nexus to help their client provide care to over 100,000 Indiana senior citizens. So today, Scott and Laura are going to be telling you about their journey, how they chose Nexus, what it meant for their organization, for their clients, and some of the challenges and successes that they have faced. So just a couple of housekeeping rules, if we could move on. Your microphones will be muted, and this session, as usual, is recorded. The recording and the slides will be available after the webinar within 24 hours. You all know that I like to keep our sessions interactive, but today what we're going to do is I'd like to make sure that Scott and Laura have time to really finish their story and talk about their journey. So we're going to keep the questions at the end, but please, feel free. At the bottom right hand, you'll see the Q&A. Have the questions come in as you think of them, but we'll take those at the end. So just the next thing, who is Scrum.org? We are founded by Ken Schwaber, who is the co-creator of Scrum, and we help people and teams solve complex problems. So we're a mission-based organization with a large, consistent global community, all working toward that mission. I think that is enough housekeeping. I'm going to pass it on to you both so you can get started.
Perfect. Thank you, Patricia. And good afternoon, everybody. Speaking for Scott and I both, we're very excited to be here today talking about our experience with Nexus. My name is Laura Hansen, but before we do full introductions, we did want to give just a brief overview of the Nexus framework. So the visual that you see on the screen right now actually comes from the Nexus guide. You can download that from Scrum.org. If you're unfamiliar with this scaled agile framework, you can think of Nexus as an extension of Scrum. It helps teams identify as a united team or Nexus instead of separate Scrum teams. If you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend checking out all of the different resources on Scrum.org's website. And now on to some intros. Like I said, my name is Laura Hansen, and I work for an Indiana-based IT consulting firm called eimagine. I've worked in IT software and solutions delivery for the past 15 years, and I spent a lot of my formative years in project management. I live in Zionsville, Indiana with my husband and two dogs, and the two dogs are pictured there on the right-hand side of the screen, Ernie and Sadie. I grew up as a little bit of a nomad. My dad was in the military, so I am a military brat. I did live in 8 states, attended 11 different schools, and lived in 14 different houses by the time I was 18 years old. I did go to college at Purdue University, and I'm proud to say that I am going on 20 years as a Hoosier. Currently, I run our talent solutions team at eimagine. My team is focused on hiring exceptional team members, professionally developing those team members, and then challenging our people by adding them to projects that make an impact. My current role on the state project that we'll be discussing today is project manager. And now I'm going to hand it over to Scott to give an introduction of himself. Scott?
Thanks, Laura. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Crane. I've worked in the IT industry for over 25 years. I recently celebrated 20 years at Imagine, so it's hard to believe. I am also a Purdue grad, but my 2 kids both attend Indiana University. So that picture to the right are my 2 kiddos. My day-to-day job at eimagine is running operations. So this is everything from sales and marketing to delivery solutions to even our people solutions team. And my current role in the state project that we will talk about today is project manager. And now for some eimagine background. We have around 100 employees. We have 20 plus years of implementation experience. We have been voted best place to work in Indiana for 7 years in a row, and we are very proud of that. We are a Salesforce partner, and we are also a Microsoft Gold partner. So we have 5 discussion topics for today. The first one is about our story, and this is the overall project background. Next, we'll talk about Project Marvel and discuss some of the challenges and fears. So here's a picture of our team to the right having lunch in downtown Indianapolis. Next, we'll talk about our Nexus journey, and Laura will explain how our journey with Nexus began and how it evolved. Next, we'll talk about some Nexus learnings. So we have 4 learnings to present. And what our goal for you today is just to pick up one tidbit of info or maybe one thing that you could share with your team. And then finally, we'll have some closing thoughts. Some overall project background. So this was a large state project for the state of Indiana, which we called Project Marvel. We'll explain why in later slides. It was a case management system in the health and human services arena. So this system allowed care managers to assist elderly Hoosiers by ensuring critical services were provided and making sure that those providers could invoice for their services. So for example, someone in the aging population would need meals delivered to their homes via Meals on Wheels. A care manager would work with this provider to ensure meals were delivered on time. And then the care manager would make sure that this provider could invoice promptly. So for 20 years, this organization tried to get a system like this across the finish line, and year over year, they were not successful. There was low confidence due to multiple efforts over the 20 years, which is understandable. It seemed like mission impossible, and let me explain why. So we originally won the maintenance and operations contract for this project. So the project was supposed to go live, and then we would take over the day-to-day maintenance and the future enhancements. However, when we first met with the state, we were asked to take over this project and implement it, knowing that this iteration had been worked on for 3+ years. If you've ever been part of a large enterprise project, there is nothing worse than inheriting a project you did not build yourself. In addition, the executive staff had recent turnover. They were as new to the project as we were. And then finally, not only did we have internal stakeholders, but external ones too. And I will explain more about this on the next slide. So the graph on the right shows 3 rings of stakeholders. We had external, we had internal, and we had eimagine. So from an external team's perspective, we had over 1,200 end users. We had 7 interface teams, and interfaces could be Medicaid data feeds, Department of Health data feeds, etc. We also had to work with federal governing bodies. Now, from an internal team's perspective, we had product owners, we had business and overall state IT, we had a QA vendor, and we even had an audit team. From an eimagine team perspective, we had 4 project managers. We had a Scrum team of 30+ individuals, including developers and business analysts, along with the internal QA team. So we had all of these different teams, internal, external, along with both functional and technical teams. We had many points of contact trying to manage individuals and complete multiple goals under one team. So here's the bottom line. Everything was a priority. And now I'm going to turn it over to Laura to explain why.
Thanks, Scott. So the challenge for our team from a scaled agile perspective was really when we shifted from implementing the system, which Scott just talked about, to supporting and enhancing the system. The best way to think about it is that for the past year, our team had been moving very quickly. We were moving towards a single goal, and we were laser focused on getting this system that we didn't create across the finish line. And so it was a huge accomplishment when our team finally brought the system live on April 1st of 2019. And I would say very shortly after, our entire world changed. So that thing that we'd been obsessing over, getting the system live, was no longer the thing that we needed to achieve. We now had a new goal. We needed to support, maintain, and enhance the system that we had now brought to production. And so this meant that our singular focus had to transform into areas of focus, multiple areas of focus. And that's really where our Nexus journey begins. So I've included a picture on this slide of the Kanban board that we had on April 1st, 2019. This is the day that we went live. And you can see, things are fairly well organized according to swim lane. Everything's kind of contained within its individual square. And then you take a look at April 8th, which is just 1 week later after go live, and it's a different story. There's a lot more complexity. Things are bursting at the seams, so to speak. There's a lot of dependencies, Post-it notes on top of Post-it notes. And so we very quickly realized that we needed to change the way that we were working. And so over the next few months, we tried a lot of different processes and configurations for our team. We struggled to effectively scale Scrum, which is what we had been practicing. And we began to look for a different way to accomplish the many priorities on our collective plates. With any change, there's a certain level of fear that accompanies that change. Will this be successful? Am I putting undue pressure on our team? What does future state really look like? And so we looked for a different way, a hopefully better way, to fulfill the various priorities of all the different stakeholders on the project, which Scott had spoken about a moment ago. And through our research, we stumbled across Nexus. And when we evaluated Nexus, there were a lot of really great things that we felt like had good affinity with the processes that we needed. One of those things being that it was based on Scrum. Check mark for our team. Our team knew Scrum, and we had been practicing it across our organization for over a decade. Nexus was flexible, even better. We needed a solution that we could mold to fit the unique requirements of the system, the project, and our contract deliverables. And perhaps the most significant feature of Nexus was that it provided a simple structure for addressing dependencies. And these are dependencies that you find between people, between areas of expertise, between input from the business, and the list goes on. But we had some fears as well. We had never done this before. We hadn't used Nexus previously as a scaled agile framework. And so we knew that we would effectively be speaking a different language for our team. And perhaps even more fear-inducing was the potential gap with our very own team when we communicated with them. Our team was day-to-day in the weeds fighting fires. And what Scott and I wanted to talk about with the team was how do we prevent those fires in the first place? So there was a fundamental disconnect in what we wanted to focus on as a team. Finally, we were concerned that all of the different stakeholders of the system wouldn't get it. They wouldn't understand what we were trying to do and why we were trying to introduce a new framework for our team. And so despite all of these different fears and reasons maybe why we shouldn't try something new, we started to talk about Nexus with the team in fall of 2019 and began to lay the groundwork. And on January 17th, we remember the day because we had an all hands meeting, we officially implemented Nexus across our entire team for Project Marvel. Now we're approaching 2 years into our Nexus journey, and this is what our team looks like today. We've had several Scrum teams. Currently there's 4, and you can see those teams named towards the bottom of the slide. They are all named after different superheroes and crime fighting teams in the Marvel universe. You might be asking yourself why. Why did you pick the Marvel universe? Well, I'll tell you why. The first team that was formed was focused on maintenance and operations. Since that team was effectively the first line of defense for the other teams that are part of the Nexus, they referred to themselves as a shield. And that eventually morphed into the shield team, a la the Marvel universe. And so from there, each team chose their own Marvel themed name when they were formed. The next to be created was Hydra, then Avengers, and then late last year, Guardians. It's important to note that we've had a couple of different Scrum configurations over the past 2 years, but the common thread has been the Nexus integration team, pictured at the top of the diagram. The Nexus integration team is also known as the NIT. So the NIT for Project Marvel is composed of representatives from all the different Scrum teams. From a communication perspective, the NIT connects daily via Microsoft Teams on a separate private channel where we address dependencies, people dependencies, process dependencies, technology dependencies. Weekly, the NIT has a longer 90-minute meeting to review metrics. We look at things like burn down, help desk ticket count, etc. We also share updates from the various Scrum teams. And then we discuss dependency issues in more detail. We've talked a lot about how Nexus has helped our team organize work and address dependencies, but what has been the impact? On the right side of the screen, you'll see that we have a sample of some of the metrics that we track on Project Marvel. One of those metrics is ticket creation and ticket resolution. Ticket creation is green, ticket resolution is yellow. And so what did Nexus do for Project Marvel? You can see that the trend between resolved and created tickets is relatively tight. And there's a small gap between what you can think of as influx of work and then the work that our team actually completed. Prior to Nexus, this was not the case. That gap was there was a much larger gap there. I don't want to paint a picture that the sky was falling, but if you compare where we were at then versus where we're at now, it's a night and day difference. And so at the end of the day, Nexus has given our teams the ability to better monitor, adapt, and ultimately meet the priorities set by the various stakeholders of Project Marvel. Specifically, in the 2.5 years that this product has been live, we've served over 100,000 individuals in the state of Indiana. While continuing to increase the number of individuals that we're serving, we've simultaneously reduced our help desk tickets by 80%. So perhaps the most impactful aspect of better organizing our work and addressing dependencies is really focused on the people side. Specifically for our care managers who leverage the system, they now have a 20-hour a month savings in using the new system versus the legacy system, which is huge. This allows care managers to spend more time with the individuals receiving services, which is the ultimate goal of the system in the first place. Now I'm going to hand it over to Scott to talk about lessons that we've learned through our Nexus journey.
Thanks, Laura. The first lesson is about multiple smaller teams increase ownership and teamwork. So working in smaller teams has increased openness for us. Teams have an opportunity to build closer working relationships and greater levels of understanding, which encourages transparent communication. Working in smaller teams has also made us more focused. We all worked in separate and different areas, and now we understood that it was all for the Nexus team itself. So in other words, we're able to be more agile, knowing we always worked for the greater good. Another item that came to us is that best of both worlds from a team perspective. We had one Nexus integration team, or NIT, and true owners for the rest of the teams. Collaborative group decisions were being made within the Nexus, or NIT, and individual teams would own pieces of it and make their own decisions accordingly. Teams were empowered, knowing they were supporting the overall Nexus integration team's goals. And then finally, and probably most importantly, teams were willing to sacrifice for one another. You would think it'd be worse having siloed teams, but since people own their teams, teams would help each other. It's about working towards a common goal and being willing to sacrifice for the Nexus team as a whole. So let me give you an example. We had a situation with the Shield helping Hydra. So if you recall, Hydra, which is the enhancement team, had a large body of work to complete. They needed extra staffing resources. And Shield, which is the maintenance and operations team, also had priorities. Without anyone saying anything during this meeting, the Shield owner offered not just one, but several staffing resources to help Hydra accomplish their goals. Shield knew that this might affect their delivery dates, but they also needed to help support the overall goals of the Nexus integration team. Let me tell you, it was incredible to witness. This was one of the key moments for our team where we started to see Nexus occur organically. The second lesson learned is taking a step backward can help build momentum moving forward. And what we mean by that is teams will morph over time due to changing business needs, maturity of the team, and even identification of better ways to perform work. This is expected and will happen organically over time. It means that the team is truly owning the processes and making Nexus their own. So for example, we used to have a Daughters of the Dragon team, and the Nexus integration team, or the NIT, wanted to transition this team under the Shield team. It could have been perceived as breaking up the band, but it actually made the team stronger. It was the right move, even though it didn't necessarily feel like it at the time. We were concerned that the overall team would think that the Daughters of the Dragon team was not doing well, and even perhaps the overall project was failing. So this is what we did. We scheduled an all-hands meeting, and we thought it was going to be an uncomfortable conversation, but it ended up having the most positive outcome of any of the changes we made from a team's perspective. The teams asked questions, and then we explained the why behind it. And then once we explained the why, it made total sense for the entire team. Eventually, later on, we added the Guardians of the Galaxy team, which is the cloud migration team. So the bottom line is that teams will morph over time, and we actually recommend these type of changes depending on the situation. We laugh now that if we add another team to Nexus, we're not sure which Marvel team we would choose. The third lesson we learned is it's important to let teams grow and mature. Scrum teams require freedom to establish their own culture, their own processes, and even their communication style. So like Laura mentioned, each Scrum team can choose which Marvel team they want to embody. It is these fundamental elements that set the stage for addressing dependency issues that will certainly arise. So for example, Scrum teams collaborated on how to onboard new employees from a training perspective. We had both functional and technical knowledge that needed to be trained. The Nexus team understood the importance of culture and wanted new employees to be successful from day one. The Shield team even took this to the next level by creating a Project Marvel certification test that includes functional, cultural, technical, and even communication type questions. All new employees on Project Marvel are required to pass this test. In our experience, teams that can mature as a collective unit can see increased camaraderie among team members. This in turn ensures that when the team encounters a stressful situation, they possess the tools to address it. So one other example. By the time we started leveraging Nexus, it was Q1 of 2020. As we all know, a nationwide lockdown for COVID occurred. We were not sure if it made sense to hire someone during the pandemic with everything going on in the world. But we said, you know what, let's go for it. And Kenny started the day we went working remote full time. We hired Kenny to help with a new team, which was Shield. So here's someone who's never physically met anyone on Project Marvel. Kenny was trying to learn eimagine as a new company, being fully remote, on a new project, and part of a new team. Bottom line, you got to let your teams grow organically. So here's the good news. Within a couple months, Kenny was part of our Nexus integration team, and he was owner of the Shield team. In fact, this team continued to grow, and overall help desk tickets were reduced significantly, which Laura displayed in that outcomes slide. The fourth lesson is that the Nexus integration team, or the NIT, is the heart of Nexus. As many teams contribute to the same product, there is an increased risk of encountering integration challenges. Those consist not only of software, but also practices, tooling, infrastructure, skill sets requirements, and other human-focused integrations. And then on top of this, dependencies between teams and work items add additional complexity. So the Nexus integration team, or the NIT, is accountable to make sure we always have a done. And what a done is an integrated increment of working software. The NIT is not an ivory tower construct. It's not where people have their heads in the clouds telling the people below what to do. What it is the NIT has a responsibility to the team to address dependencies and ensure that the goals of the sprint are accomplished. On Project Marvel, we take this responsibility very seriously, and even going as far as to have quarterly goals for continuous improvement initiatives for all members of the Nexus integration team. So for example, here's our Q3 goals within the NIT. We have implementing a learning management system, an LMS, to increase our user adoption and help onboarding new team members. Number 2, we execute our communication plan for a large upcoming release. Number 3, we update our standard operating procedures for the Shield team. And number 4, develop an enhancement roadmap for the financial module of the system. So in conclusion, and regarding Project Marvel, we rely on the NIT to promote collaboration, to focus on those dependencies, and then pave the way for open communication. So now I'm going to turn it over to Laura for some closing thoughts.
Thanks, Scott. So as you evaluate Nexus as a scaled agile framework for your organization or your team, there are some things to be mindful of from an adoption perspective. And, we've talked about a few of those things, but wanted to kind of wrap it up in a bow. So the first is that, Nexus is a lot of different things. It's lightweight, it's easy to understand, it bolsters communication, but at the end of the day, it's not a magic wand. The purpose of Nexus is not to fix issues associated with scaling. Rather, Nexus is a tool that allows teams to identify, discuss, and solve for dependencies. It's important to understand that implementing Nexus is like cleaning out your bedroom closet. You have to make a bigger mess and really see what's in the closet before you can figure out the best path forward. Another thing to be mindful of from a Nexus adoption perspective is that Scrum is at the heart of Nexus. Teams with maturity in Scrum will have a foundation to scale from. While you could, in theory, implement Scrum and Nexus at the same time, there is greater risk in doing so. As part of implementing Nexus, it's also important to be mindful of the inherent cultural differences that will happen when you create different teams. These microcultures can have differences in the way that people communicate and the way that they complete work. It's important to foster those individual team cultures as well as the culture of the broader Nexus. Finally, recognize that your team or teams will find new ways of doing things as part of addressing dependencies within the Nexus. This will cause the team to create new cow paths, or in our case, entirely new Scrum teams and communication paths for those teams to take. In closing, we've had many learnings over the past 2 years of our Nexus journey. While some of those things can be applied directly to your organization or team, it's important to remember that one size fits none. And Nexus is unique in its ability to be simultaneously descriptive, but not prescriptive. recognize that your Nexus journey will look different than ours, and that's okay. Our hope is that we've shared at least one morsel of information that's helpful for you as you embark on your own journey to scale. So thank you all for your time. I did want to also point out, and we will share this deck, that Scott and I have included our contact information in here. And we would love to hear from you if you have any, after the webinar, if you have questions or even comments or stories that you'd like to share with us. And then we did also include a slide of some helpful links of resources that we leveraged in our own Nexus journey, and then also as we've been putting this presentation together. So thank you all so much for listening intently. I'm going to hand it back to Patricia to kind of handle the questions that are coming in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Scott and Laura, for sharing your experience with Nexus and all the good stuff that you've been able to do for the state of Indiana. Sure. I know that that's so important for you guys as you keep on talking about being a Hoosier and all those things. So I love that you're doing great stuff for your community. So there's a bunch of questions that are coming in, and I'm going to try to organize these as best as I can on the fly. I think one of the things that will be interesting in general is this question is going to come up, right? So you were using Scrum, and the teams, what you guys decided that would make sense for you was Nexus. And I think explicitly people are wondering, why Nexus over something like Less or the Safe, which are, I wouldn't say, these are apples to apples, but they're the ones that a lot of people are familiar with.
Sure. That's a great question, by the way. I think for us, just knowing that, we had used Scrum for so many years, and the thing that we really liked about Nexus was the flexibility, and we could see some direct ties, with some of the, for example, the knit. I would say we probably had an informal knit before we really officially adopted Nexus. And so for us, it aligned with how our team was informally structured, if that makes sense.
That actually makes perfect sense, because when I was working on the development of the Nexus framework with Ken Schwaber, and so before I say that, for any of you who aren't familiar, the Nexus guide is available for everyone. On the scrum.org website. There's tons of webinars, there's papers, there's all those sort of things. So when we're talking about the NIT, the Nexus integration team, these are usually people who are members of the individual Scrum teams. And what their calling is to make sure that, we're helping to look at dependencies and make sure that the Scrum teams are aware of that, so that we can kind of get ahead of those things. So they're looking at, the Nexus integration team is looking at generally the integration of the Nexus, and also working with the teams to integrate that work. But what Ken said, back to what you were saying, Laura, is he said, hey Trish, has anybody just said this feels like common sense? Like, it just seems like if a lot of people were scaling and the problem that they were facing was, how do we work together? We're trying to get one thing out the door. It would be natural to think about dependency. So I'm glad that you actually said that. That being said, when you guys were working and, earlier in the project, you had mentioned that everything was a priority, right? And so we face that a lot when we think about different program management, project management, but in programs, everything's a priority. And somebody's asking, did this have to fit in with some sort of product roadmap? How did you guys figure out what to prioritize when you're using Nexus?
Hey, Laura, I'll start off on this one.
Sure.
I think there's kind of two prioritizations. One is, with the business, and I'll let Laura talk on that piece. I'm going to talk a little bit more on the Imagine side. So I would say for us, we were, like Laura said, we were overwhelmed after we had gone live. And really where we took a look at priorities was really those Nexus integration team meetings. And those were those 90-minute meetings, along with, we also have quarterly kind of goal setting meetings. So like Patricia said, you have members or owners of each of the Scrum teams there. And then we work together as the Nexus or the knit, and then really focus on those priorities. So we do have a product owner kind of in proxy mentality. But that's how we kind of look at it from a priority perspective. And then I'm gonna let Laura talk a little bit how we work with the client or the business.
Yeah. So when we work with the business, we use a tool called affinity diagramming to get a sense of priority with them. So essentially what we do is we print out all the different various user stories, and we do have a pretty large backlog for this system. One of the benefits of, having a longer implementation cycle, meaning, they had tried to get this system across the finish line, and then we ended up taking it across the finish line, is that there was a lot on that wish list. So that, we came into the system when we went live, with a few hundred enhancements that, folks had submitted over the years. So the way that we kind of peel through all of those different priorities is we use affinity diagramming, and we meet with the business once a quarter and prioritize all of those things. And then we plan out all of our different sprints using the information that we prioritize in that meeting.
There's something important that both of you noted, which was, having conversation with business representatives who are the product owners. Now, what you're talking about here is a huge thing of rebuilding a legacy system, whereas, other companies just wish they could set them on fire and start again, right? What some people are interested in noting is you're talking about all these enhancements and stuff. How did you handle the tech debt? How did you handle the improvements and all the bugs and all that stuff that would naturally come up, because that really hurts your ability to innovate and to move forward? How did you guys handle that? And did it change when you were looking at it from the beginning as you start to progress as a Nexus working together?
Yeah, I can start on that, Scott. So
sure.
I think one of the things that, in the early, we'll call it the early days, right after we went live, we were probably scrambling a bit. I think where we started to gain some traction is when we took a step back and looked at trends. So we really started to focus on the data. So we started to categorize tickets and enhancement work that we were receiving, and then putting those categories up on a board and seeing, okay, what's naturally floating to the top of what we need to address. And that's really the way that we kind of ate the elephant that was, technical debt. Not that there was a ton, but, any system, when you're taking over from another vendor, there's going to be some things there. So we really looked at the enhancement work and the tickets that we were receiving to prioritize, what technical debt we needed to address first.
Yeah, and I would add to just on top of that, the Shield team is the one that handled the day-to-day tickets. And at first, like Laura was saying, when we went live, that team was incredibly large because we were just fighting fires after fire. Then like we said, we introduced the Hydra team, which is the enhancement side. So when we have our knit meetings, we have representatives from both, and they both understand both are important. We've got to provide enhancements, but we have also got to reduce tickets. So I think from a technical debt, we can look at that and say what will help in each of those cases. And sometimes there's some more help desk priorities, and then sometimes it's more enhancements or maybe simultaneous.
Thanks for sharing that. That's important information. If I may, there's some different, I'm trying to, again, just kind of structure these. There's some good questions, I think, about how y'all thought about the structure of Nexus and in terms of the team. So one of the things that you talked about was, the product owner and, people having that representation of the different teams and that coming up. And you've talked about the ebb and flow that you said, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the names of teams, but one team ate another team essentially. How did you guys know, when to add or remove teams from the Nexus?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say it comes organically, and it comes from the knit, so that Nexus integration team. So when you start hearing about a team needs to do so-and-so or handle, whether it's enhancements, tickets, etc., we really took a step back and said, is that one of the existing teams, right? Can Shield handle it? Can Hydra? Can Avengers or Guardians? But really that Nexus team is the one that's going to decide that. In the case, with the Guardians, because the cloud migration was such a large initiative, we knew at that time that we needed to create a separate team because it was a separate body of work, but it had a bunch of dependencies, right? It's going to affect tickets and it's going to affect enhancements, particularly because here we're trying to migrate to the cloud. So it was just for us having the representative there, along with making sure we just address any of those dependencies was critical. And Laura, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think the other thing, at least for us, we talked a little bit about that. We have a weekly 90-minute knit meeting, and we have people submit, we call them issues, but they're essentially dependency, issues that have arisen as we've done work. And we actually keep an archive of all those issues, and we'll go back over time and take a look at what's coming in. And so as Scott's saying, if you see some trends about, hey, there's a bottleneck over here, that's when you can start to kind of get a sense that, hey, we might need to reorganize here. There's been a shift in the way that we're doing work or receiving work. And that's probably one of the big indicators that we look at.
Okay. Diving a little deeper then, because you've talked about the different teams and how they're focused on different things, but would you say that any of your teams work on a single backlog item from the product backlog? Is any team able to pull that, or is there some sort of scope? And if there is scope, how do you start to balance width, I think is the gist of this question.
So that's a good question. So the Shield team is, mostly focused on kind of help desk tickets, and I would say smaller development items or deliverables. And the enhancement team, the Hydra team, is really focused on those larger, longer term items. So we almost use sizing in a way to delineate what different teams will work on, maybe sizing and impact. If it's a larger impact and we know that it will require more testing cycles, eyes from the business, that would be something that we would, siphon over to the Hydra side. If it's something that is maybe a little bit more of a quick hit, it's something that we can release during a maintenance window, that would be more of a Shield type of work item. So I would say the team self-manages that. We don't necessarily, dictate and say, this is a Shield item and this is a Hydra item. They almost kind of have naturally developed this criteria that they leverage to, pluck things from the backlog.
Yeah. And I would add too, there have been times where we've gotten an item and the Shield team has taken a look at it because we think it's a smaller endeavor, and it ends up being a very large endeavor. We find out like maybe regression testing is required, or this is really a bigger scoped item, then that will actually transfer to the Shield team. So, and that's all discussed in the knit, particularly either on the quarterly meeting or in the weekly 90-minute meeting. So we have seen items transition based upon once kind of the full analysis is done of what's the impacts, what are the dependencies, what testing is required, like Laura said.
So that brings us up to these few questions, which are interesting. So sorry if you're getting any background noise from me, but now how did you all actually determine, how was the Nexus integration team formed in your Nexus? Was that raise your hand, or was that a voluntary, or was that a, hey, please could you do this?
It was a punishment. No.
That's not true, Laura.
It's not true. That's not true.
We'll have to edit that part out.
We don't tell other people that's what it was. Do you want to take that, or you want me to take it?
Sure, I'll start off. Like Laura mentioned before, we informally kind of had a knit going, and at that time, they were kind of unofficial teams. So it was really organic for us, so that when we said, hey, this is to the entire team, Project Marvel, hey, we're going to implement Nexus, then it was more of a formality. And then obviously we wanted representation. So every team has representation there. And in fact, it depends on the size of the team. They may have multiple representation. And then we actually have kind of the product owner by proxy. And that's probably more important on the Hydra side, because that's when they're doing the affinity diagram and understanding the priorities. So we have that side. And then we have kind of what we call executive kind of leadership, and they are always involved from the knit. So they may not run a day-to-day Scrum team, but we do feel it's very important to have eimagine leadership representation. And that's like Laura and myself, and there's one other individual, Doug. Hey there, Doug. So we are always at those weekly meetings. I'll let you go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I think, something else that we look at, we're a pretty flat organization. There's not a lot of hierarchy. And so one of the things that we really look at when, you're identifying team members for the knit is, looking at those informal leaders. So looking at those folks who are naturally kind of wrapping their arms around things, that are representing the team, that tend to be kind of that connection point for different team members to go to. So typically when we, grab people for the knit, it's almost like everybody's nodding their head. Yes, they understand why, this is the person that I go to that helps me, figure out this dependency.
I think one of the things that we see is almost like that's an extra, that can be perceived as you have now an extra responsibility, right? So somebody on the Nexus integration team, it's a way for maybe to bring external people that usually aren't part of the conversation into the Nexus, but it's very much, are there people on the teams? How do I get that representation so that instead of talking to 100 people, we can talk to, 5 to 10 people or something like that. There's an interesting question that came up. So, somebody can be full-time or part-time on the Nexus integration team. Did you guys, and you might not know, and, you can also be open and honest if it was yourselves, but was there any resistance or reluctance when it came to the perception of we need to commit additional time? And I know, Scott, you talked a lot about, there's this interesting balance you saw between individual focus on the individual Scrum teams, yet this identity as a Nexus that was built. How, as a Nexus integration team, do you go, I'm responsible for that and all these additional things? What did that look like?
Do you want me to take that, Scott?
Sure.
Yeah. I guess that hasn't been, and this could be a cultural thing, meaning cultural for our company. One of our core values are hungry, humble, aware. It's funny when we ask those people to have a seat at the table, I guess there was never been a discussion of, is this, this is additional work, or this is going to take me away from this. A lot of our discussions are, yes, if like, hey, yes, I would love to have a seat at the table. And this is what this means. I'm going to need help with, this other initiative over here. And we've done a lot of that. When we've brought on new team members, some of that has been the result of folks joining the knit and then having responsibilities that they just need help with. And so we really rely on that open communication and, input from our team to know if people are feeling overwhelmed or, if we need to, move around some responsibilities in order to allow them to serve on the knit.
And I would add too, yes, they are owners of the individual Scrum teams, but you also are an owner of the knit. And what I mean by that is you can bring your dependencies or your issues to that group, and you can rely on others to help you. So if anything, I would say there's a tendency to put too many people on the knit, and I'm not sure if there's a right or wrong answer of the size depending on the the number of team members on your project. But I would say for us, it's been a great thing of they're wanting to be part of that team, because not only can they have ownership over their team, but they can help dictate, like we were talking about quarterly goals. That's not just one of us saying, hey, this is what we've got to do. Some of these are internal goals, like, us making sure we have onboarding people, making that as seamless as possible. But then there's obviously some business goals that go hand in hand, and we can talk about those as a knit.
Yeah, and also with the teams, and that's a really good point. How many people should be on a knit, and one of the themes that you see around Nexus, and my hope is that it's a question of, obviously the consultative answers, it depends, but it's also think about that overhead, right? So, Jack wants to be in the Nexus integration team, but Jack's not doing anything. So, okay, that's great, Jack. There's as we're talking about how the teams in the Nexus work together, there's one last question I'd like to ask about the events. Like what did that look like? And then we should start wrapping up. But what did, for instance, some of those Nexus level events, like the Nexus Sprint Planning, look like, or the Nexus Sprint Retrospective? What did those look like for y'all?
Yeah, that's a great question. From a retrospective perspective, we do leverage Salomo to conduct our retros, and it really varies on topically what comes up in those sessions, but we do include all the different individuals in it. As we've been remote, we've had to find different ways to accomplish the retro in an effective manner, meaning we were very used, prior to COVID, we all had our own floor in this office building that we're in, and we were all seated in close proximity with one another. So we would use whiteboards and Post-its and all of that fun stuff to do our retros. And now we've moved to, doing it more in Visio. But I would say we have really open conversations, and some of those things from the retros that we have are things that actually then bubble up into either quarterly goals that the knit is owning, or goals for individual Scrum teams. So yeah, Scott, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I think part of the question was what are some of the other ceremonies we have from a overall Nexus. So, we talked about from the knit, we have our weekly meeting, which is 90 minutes long. We do a quarterly, which is probably 2 to 3 hours, depending on, how many items we need to discuss. We also do the retro, like Laura's saying, but then, we do not meet from a knit in person, but we, like Laura said in the slide deck, we have a channel open. And so we find it very effective of just jumping on and having a conversation. And then if that leads to having, a face-to-face, meaning via, Teams or Zoom or whatever it may be, we can do that. I think the other thing to keep in mind is each of those Scrum teams have a daily stand-up. So that does occur, and we do feel like that's a very important ceremony. So each of those Scrum teams meet independently. And then the Nexus integration team, or the knit, is the one that has the channel open. And if something comes out of those Scrum meetings, we all jump on or answer questions, because sometimes it's just a technical question. Sometimes it's a functional, or, hey, let's talk about it in our 90-minute meeting, where we bring up dependencies and such.
Mm. And COVID has done so many things, right? The biggest question was like, how do we work with remote teams now? And now it's the game of everybody's remote. So it sounds like you guys have found different ways and tools that have been valuable to you. So as we start to wrap up, I think one of the things that we'd love to know is, where are you planning to take this next? Are there things that you think you still that you'd like to improve in terms of using Nexus? Are there is there a desire to use Nexus in different places?
Yeah, that's a good question. from an Imagine perspective, we've looked at this to say on large enterprise projects, we would really like to implement Nexus on other projects. I think there's, how you can think of it is, the Project Marvel was the pilot project. And it's been a huge success. So I would say number one is we plan on using this. And I would say, when I say enterprise, just because of the volume of individuals on the team and needing that kind of next level structure or framework. I think from just the Project Marvel team, we're always looking of adding or removing teams, just growing organically. I think also like the Nexus integration team, I think a year from now that will look different, just with individuals. Like a perfect example is the Guardians of the Galaxy team. That will be wrapped up by next year. So that team will morph. It might be consumed by SHIELD or Hydra, but I could see that team being dissolved once we actually go to the cloud. So that would probably be another example of where I see Nexus going to the next level. Laura, I don't know if you had anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think this might be a little squishy, but we really look at how can we make everybody the best version of themselves. And so, our hope as we're growing the Nexus is how are we challenging those individuals so that they are owning more and really fulfilling, their professional goals. And so, when we look at the Nexus, we're just looking for that Nexus to continue to just gain in maturity. There's always, the really fun thing about projects is that there's always an area that needs attention or that you can improve upon. There's always some sort of curveball. And so there's certainly not a lack of opportunities for people to kind of flex those professional skills.
That's great. That's great to hear, especially in this day and age when so many people in our area have a lot of choices that they can choose, and the people you probably choose to work with are people who are trying to expand themselves. So maybe just in the last minute before we close up, for those people who are thinking about using Nexus, what would your advice to be to them about how to get started?
Yeah, I would say, Laura talked about this. I would make sure that you've been practicing Scrum. Not that it's a requirement, but I think really once you've kind of mastered Scrum and all the ceremonies and framework around it, then moving to Nexus makes it more natural. I would also look to say, how would you break your Scrum teams? Like how many teams would you have? What does that look like on paper, so to speak? And then figure out, because then you would have representation from the NIT, et cetera, et cetera. But, it may be you break down the teams based upon contract or proposal info. It may be because of technical or functional teams. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. How do you divvy up teams? Anything else on that, Laura?
Yeah, I would say, listen, I know it was one of our lessons learned about letting the team grow organically, but I think letting the team, in Agile, there's this concept of failing fast. I think let the team fail quickly and move on to another configuration or process or how they're identifying dependencies. I think that's really critical to that Nexus growth and process.
Sounds like you all must have certifications or something. You're right, because this is all about preserving the self-managing team. So I want to thank you both. Thank you, Scott and Laura, again for sharing your experiences, and everybody who's been listening. If we could just move on, there are there are lots of ways for people to start to self-learn and to explore more resources. If you're interested in Nexus, learning more about scaling and enterprise things, Lindsay has dropped some links into the chat. But there's learning paths. There are tons of webinars that we continue to do. And we're always happy to bring people on who have implemented Nexus with their clients or in their own companies. So that's that. There are some questions left that we didn't get to, but we'll make sure that Scott and Laura, they get to see them, and feel free to reach out to them directly also. You'll see their emails in the slides. Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you very much.
Thank you, everybody.